Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Automation Podcast, brought to you by InsightsInAutomation.com. I'm your host, Sean Tierney, and on today's show, we'll talk to you about the following items. First, we'll talk a little about me and my background, as this is our first show and I am your host. Next, we'll talk about the mission of InsightsInAutomation.com. We'll discuss the goal and purpose of this podcast and its expected length and cadence. And then we'll end the show with a preview of our next episode. So with that, let's get started. Who am I, your host of the Automation Podcast? Well, as I already mentioned in the intro, my name is Sean Tierney. I've spent the last 24 years working in the world of industrial automation, and I've specialized in the use of using Allen Bradley programmable controllers and HMI, as well as Rockwell SCADA and MES software products. Over the last 24 years, I've attended over 50 weeks of factory training, and I've worked with hundreds of engineers across hundreds of facilities. During that time, I've been taught so much by so many that I always felt a deep need to give back and help others. And that's the core of what InsightsInAutomation.com is all about. I hope to share what I've learned over all those years with you in the coming weeks and months through the written word on theautomationblog.com, through short tutorial videos at theautomationminute.com, and through the spoken word in this podcast from theautomationpodcast.com. Even though InsightsInAutomation.com was founded in 2013, it's built on over 20 years of previous efforts. It all started in the early 90s in the Deep South, where I published a few editions of a short automation newsletter. Upon moving back to the Northeast in the mid-90s, I won approval at my new company to open up a dial-up bulletin board service, or BBS, to allow the electronic sharing of automation files and news with clients. Then in 1999, I launched my first personal website, SeanMichael.com. On this site, I shared sample PLC code, HMI projects, and the tech notes which I wrote. Later, I moved all that content to SeanMTierney.com, which also integrated my family and hobby websites. Back then, I was using FrontPage and some custom HTML, like many others were doing at the time. This was back before blogging software like WordPress became popular. In 2007, I began a 5-year hiatus from my after-hours automation efforts to focus on learning PHPBB and MySQL, and then later vBulletin, in order to build and maintain a small community website for myself and my fellow hobbyists. That site, which I recently took a sabbatical from, is still up and running and can be found at casualadultgamers.com. Note, if you're looking for a great group of adults to game with, you'll find none better on the internet. After managing that site for 5 years and with over 5 years of unpublished automation tips and sample code building up on my hard drive, in 2012 I began setting the stage for a new suite of automation websites, all focused around InsightsInAutomation.com. Which brings us back to the present day and the automation podcast you're listening to right now. The goal for this podcast is the sharing of helpful information on using automation products. The current plan is to produce 1 to 2 shows each week, and the aim is to keep them focused on a single subject, with an expected length between 5 and 10 minutes. Well, at least that's the plan right now. Hopefully you'll find this podcast and the other websites I've mentioned helpful in your work with industrial automation products. And I definitely want to hear your feedback, comments, and suggestions too. So please take a moment and stop by theautomationpodcast.com and let me know your thoughts. Before we go, let's take a look at what's coming up in our next podcast. Tune in for episode 2 later this week for an important discussion on RS Logix 5000 version 20.03. You'll definitely want to hear the details about this version before you install it. Well, that's it for episode 1 of the Automation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Tierney, and until next time, peace.